Should NXT go back to 2 hours? Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Welcome to your Enhancement Talent review for WWE NXT September 25th, 2019. And yeah, this is how we're going to start this show. And, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm negative on NXT and the move to USA, because overall I think it's a good move. The show last week I thought was very good, but this week I think it showed the difference between them doing a 1 hour show versus a 2 hour show, and I really felt it this week. And it's not because, you know, the wrestling wasn't good or it wasn't the performers weren't good. It was that there was just a lot of stuff on this show that, you know, there were fine matches that I wasn't invested in or really given much reason to invest in. And, you know, I've made it clear in the last review I did that I don't watch NXT weekly, or at least I haven't until the move to USA. And I think that my perspective as someone who hasn't watched NXT on the network every week for the past 5 years, I think that that is what is going to be a large portion of what they want their audience to be, is the people that don't have the network and haven't watched NXT every week. So, I think it's important to have that perspective. If you are someone that has watched NXT every week, that not everybody has. And that is the audience that you're trying to garner. And so in a show like this, and I give them full credit, because this was a 2 hour show and it was nothing but wrestling matches. There was no fluff in between. I don't believe there was a promo segment. It was all wrestling for 2 hours. Nothing but entrances, some commercials, and wrestling. And I commend that approach. But in some cases, there needs to be some reason for me to care about what is going on in the ring. And there needs to be more backstory or something that I can sink my teeth into, that I can process as more than just, okay, here's two guys and they're going to wrestle. So I do feel like that was lacking on this show. And, you know, obviously that's in part because I'm not familiar with everyone. I'm still new to watching NXT every week. I've always watched the TakeOver shows, but, you know, the TakeOver shows, they're 5 matches in 2.5 hours. So, it's not like everyone I see on the TakeOvers is all I'm going to be seeing on the television show. And now, with NXT at 2 hours, there's so much more time to fill. And I don't know. And this could just be a bump in the road. Maybe it will be fleshed out and as I get more familiar with everything, it won't feel this way. But to me, this week's NXT felt like it would have been 10 times better if it was a 1 hour show. If this was a 1 hour show, you cut out all of the really not needed things. You get the Keith Lee match with Dijakovic that opened the show. You get the Riddle and Dane street fight, you have that. Maybe you shorten that a little bit and throw in another match, maybe the Rhea Ripley match, or maybe the Dakota Kai match. But a lot of the other stuff, it just didn't feel like it needed to be there. And that's not to say it was bad either. Because, I mean, there were fine matches in this show. The 6-man that ended the network version of the show was fine. The Lorcan and Birch match, the tag match, it was fine. It was a very run-of-the-mill sort of tag match, but, you know, it was fine. But it wasn't needed. I don't really know what I gained from seeing that. And, you know, I'm going to get into the main event when we get there, but I don't know what the hell they were trying to accomplish with that match. And I'll go to that in more detail later, but, you know, I just don't feel like it really accomplished what it should have. And the Dane and Matt Riddle street fight I thought was good, but I also felt like it didn't have to be as long as it was. You could probably say that about the opening match, but, you know, I loved every minute of that, so I wouldn't really say that. But if we're condensing it into a 1-hour show, then if you have to cut a couple minutes from that match, it won't really suffer from it. Keith Lee and Dijakovic are going to do their thing no matter what time limit you give them. But you get my point, is that a lot of this stuff just felt unneeded. You know, the Dakota Kai and Tainara match, I would have put that on a 1-hour version of a show, possibly, just to have Dakota Kai get her return match. And then at the same time, the Rhea Ripley match I thought was effective for her, as they're trying to build her into the Shayna Baszler title feud at some point. So, you know, if you do like a 1-hour show with maybe those 4 matches, with the 2 women's matches being a little bit short because they're really just meant to put over Dakota Kai and Rhea Ripley, so they don't really have to be that long to do that. But a lot of the other stuff, I just didn't feel like there was a big need for it. The Cameron Grimes and Raul Mendoza match, it was fine, but I don't really know what I'm getting yet. And I'm not all that familiar with Cameron Grimes. I just don't know. I just didn't feel like I gained anything from seeing that. And, you know, it could just be me. It could just be that I'm unfamiliar with these things. And, you know, it could just be that it'll take time for me to adjust to it. And maybe a few weeks from now, I'll be singing a different tune. But I just felt like there needed to be more story elements throughout this show. Just to have a 2-hour show of nothing but wrestling matches, it's a good idea in theory, but in practice, I'm not sure if it works as well. And, you know, I know that's NXT's bread and butter. And that's what they thrive to do, is to be able to tell their storylines while also having a predominantly wrestling-heavy show. And when it comes to, like, the takeovers, that's great, because you just get 2.5 to 3 hours of 5 really good matches. And, you know, that's another thing. Like, if weekly NXT TV is going to be just 2 hours of nothing but wrestling, and then the takeovers are going to be 2.5 hours of nothing but wrestling, then, you know, that's not that big of a difference. So it might kind of take away from the takeover feel. I doubt that. I mean, they put on good takeovers every time. But I don't know, it could just be a case of like a burnout. And I feel like that's the one thing NXT has always been great at, is that anytime you watched an NXT show, you would feel like, you know, I could go for more of that. I'm sure it was like that when NXT was 1 hour long, even though I wasn't really paying that close attention to it on a week-by-week basis. If by the end of the show you were thinking that you wish it was longer, then that means it's accomplished what it set out to do. It left you wanting more. And that's how I felt after pretty much like every takeover. But I watched this show, and once I was done with it, I was done. I was tapped out. I couldn't have handled anymore, because it was pushed to the brink. And I just feel like if we went to USA and kept the NXT format of doing a 1 hour show and condensed this stuff into an hour, or I mean, even if you want to do an hour and a half, I mean, you could do that. But either way, I think it would be better without that extra hour. And it's fully transparent why the extra hour is there. We all know that next Wednesday will be the debut of AEW Dynamite on TNT. And of course, this NXT show is there to go head-to-head with it. And so they didn't want to only do 1 hour. They didn't want to only take away from 1 hour of AEW. They wanted to go for the whole thing. And so, should NXT change back to 1 hour? I mean, when you look at it from the business perspective, probably not. For one, it's going to be an extra hour of ad revenue on the USA Network, which starting next week, the full 2 hours will be on USA. There won't be half on USA and half on the WWE Network. And the only reason that this is here is to try to take away from AEW and battle with them the best that they can. And so, no matter how I might feel, and I might be in the minority here, I don't really know. I haven't really seen any other opinions out there on this, so I'm interested to listen to some reviews later and see if anyone else is feeling that same way. But, you know, let me know what you think in the comments if you would like. Do you think NXT would be better at 1 hour? Or do you like the format they have going right now? Just let me know what you think. But we're going to jump off of that. We're going to get into the full review here. NXT started off with the best match on the show. They kicked off right away with it. Keith Lee versus Donovan Dijakovic. Easily the best match on the show, in my opinion. And I know that they've had matches before, and they have great chemistry together. And Keith Lee, man, if you've never seen a Keith Lee match, like, he is just outstanding. The things that he is able to do at that size is ridiculous, and I know that's not much of a hot take or anything, but either way, someone that size to be able to do the things, jumping out of the ring, the topes and the leapfrogs and everything that he does is quite ridiculous. Dijakovic, very tall guy, not as big in wideness as Keith Lee is, but he's able to. They are such a good mesh together. I just don't know how to explain it, but they just work great together. And before the match, and they did this a few times throughout the night, they did a tail of the tape, which I like that they're doing that. Gives it a more sports-oriented feel. I already love Keith Lee just doing simple stuff like leapfrog, drop downs. It just looks ridiculous from someone his size. After that, Lee shoulder tackles Dijak out of the ring. They try to suplex each other. Keith Lee tries to suplex Donovan into the ring while he's trying to suplex him out of the ring. It ends up with both of them on the apron, and Lee ends up getting chokeslammed onto the apron, and that's what fades into commercial. Come back, Keith Lee is going to do a corkscrew dive to the outside. Follow this up with a second rope moonsault from Keith Lee to Dijakovic, which is a near fall. This then leads a little bit later on to Dijak hitting a damn Canadian Destroyer off the turnbuckle to Keith Lee, who kicks out. And I'll admit that was a bit of overkill. The top rope Canadian Destroyer only getting a near fall. Especially being that our champion, his one of his signature moves, not his finisher, but his sort of finisher, the Panama Sunrise, is just a Canadian Destroyer. So now we see Dijak do that off the top rope only to get a near fall. Dijak hits a moonsault off the top, goes into the pin, but Lee sits up while cradling Dijakovic. He does a backwards roll, all while holding Donovan. Lifts him up and gets him into his finish, which was basically a fireman's carry into a jackhammer. I don't know what it was called. It was, I think Morrow called it something or other, catastrophe. I don't know what it's called, but it was a fireman's carry into a jackhammer. This was an awesome match. And if there's anyone that the 2-hour move could help, it's definitely guys like Keith Lee and Donovan Dijakovic. You know, Lee, by all accounts, was very underutilized under the 1-hour format. So maybe this will be a good opportunity for him. Because, I mean, God, I would love to see more of Keith Lee and hopefully into a main event picture at some point, or at least into the North American title scene. Like, this guy's money. And Dijak isn't bad either. Understatement. But both guys, great. Great work together. This is where Mauro Ranallo informs us that next week on NXT, they will have the full 2 hours on the USA Network with limited commercials. And this was said throughout the night that there would be limited commercials next week. So, we're pulling out all of the Monday Night War tactics. Maybe soon AEW will announce that they'll be airing starting at 7:57 instead of 8. Or maybe they'll spoil an NXT taping or something, even though they're not taped. But maybe there'll be like a preempted show or something they can do that for. That'd be pretty funny. Yeah. So, but you know, we're not counter programming. Remember, that's what Triple H said. We had Dakota Kai versus Tainara. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. This is Dakota Kai's first match back after tearing her ACL last year. And so this match was pretty much just a setup for Kai to show off what she can do. And she did just that. She kicked the hell out of Tainara for most of the match. And then ended with a GTK, which I guess is go-to kick. Nice little brief showcase for Dakota Kai. Not much more than that. We'll see what they follow up with her. After this, and this would be the main event of the USA portion of the show, so this is the end of the first hour, is Killian Dain versus Matt Riddle in a street fight. And as announced by William Regal last week, the winner will get a shot at Adam Cole's NXT Championship. This was a good match. As I mentioned earlier, I thought it could have been shorter, but, you know, that's a nitpick. It was a fine match. Eventually, they go to the back, similar to what they did last week, except this time there was no one back there that got involved in the match. Riddle gets tackled by Dane through, like, some sort of wall. Like, I don't even... I couldn't really tell what the setting was, if they just wanted us to believe that it was a wall, or if it was just something that was there. But he tackles him through it, and that leads into the commercial. Come back, they're fighting into the crowd, and Riddle does a senton or a broton or whatever the hell he wants to call it through a table to Dane. Later on, Dane in the ring, he hits 3 Vader bombs on Riddle. He's going to go for a 4th one, putting a chair on Riddle, but Riddle gets up, gets a chair shot in, gets I was about to call him Vader, gets Dane up for a powerbomb, throws the chair into his hands. He basically does the Van Daminator, except he does a step-up knee strike instead of a kick, getting the chair right into the face of Dane, and that's another near fall. Riddle does... I thought that would have been a fine finish if he just put him away with the pin there, but Riddle is going to eventually put away Dane with with an armbar, a Fujiwara armbar. So... I like that Riddle wins matches with other submissions other than the bro mission. I think that's good to keep him looking like a submission specialist, as he should be with his fighting experience. So it's cool that he can put away guys with an armbar, or he can do the bro mission. I think it would have been fine if he ended it with the knee strike to the chair. You know, solid match. I thought it was pretty predictable that Riddle would win, since I didn't really think they were going to do Dane as a heel versus Cole as a heel. And I know that Riddle and Cole have had their interactions in the past, so it definitely felt like the predictable outcome. But either way, I'm interested in a Cole versus Riddle match. Cole comes down to tell Riddle he's not in his league and all that. Not on mic, but just yelling at him. Riddle ends up, because as Cole is berating Matt Riddle, he's, gesturing at him by pointing at him and saying you'll never be NXT champion. So Riddle ends up grabbing Cole's hand and putting him in the Fujiwara armbar. Cole is tapping out profusely until the rest of the Undisputed Era, Roderick Strong, Kyle O'Reilly, and Bobby Fish run in. Riddle ducks out of the ring and goes up the ramp, and that is that. So that is how they end the USA version of NXT, and then we get to the second hour on the WWE Network, which is going to start with Rhea Ripley squashing Kaden Carter. This wasn't much to it. Like I said earlier, they did need to do something with Ripley to try to build her up to eventually take on Baszler. And I really like Ripley. I love her new demeanor that she has with the look she has. Just looks like an absolute badass. So she is the perfect person to take out Baszler, because she can just out Baszler. And if Shayna is eventually going to go to Raw or SmackDown, which I can't imagine that she's not going to fairly soon. I know we've been saying that for like the last year. But Shayna's done everything there is to do in NXT. I would like if we just traded Shayna for Asuka. Send Asuka back to NXT so she can not chase around 24/7 titles and go back to being the badass that she was in NXT. That would be nice. But, yeah, nonetheless, this was fine. Both women's matches on this card were pretty short, but I guess they were both what they needed to be. They were really both just showcase matches for Ripley and Dakota Kai. We had Oney Lorcan and Danny Birch versus a team I wasn't very familiar with. I had their names as Martell and Parker. This was a basic WWE tag main roster match. Nothing like an NXT TakeOver tag match. Lorcan gets worked over for most of the match. Birch gets the hot tag. I guess the story is like Birch starts yelling and gets hyped up, and then Lorcan, who was laid out on the outside, feeds into that energy and got back up. They tag Lorcan back in, and then they're going to hit a double team elevated DDT. Essentially, one of them is holding up the legs, and the other one hits the DDT, and that is going to get them the win. This was fine. I didn't need to see it. I didn't gain anything from seeing it, but it was fine. After this, we got Cameron Grimes versus Raul Mendoza. Grimes tried to finish the match in 5 seconds, the same way he did last week, trying to do the double stomp right out of the gate, but Mendoza was ready. He did his homework. He knew that he couldn't lose in 5 seconds. He had to lose in at least 5 minutes. Again, this match was fine, but I really didn't care much about it, and didn't really feel like I've been given much reason to care about Grimes. I mean, he's had 2 showcase matches, and, well, I guess you can't even call the last one a showcase match. He beat a guy in 5 seconds and did one move. This one was more of a showcase match because it was more of a back and forth, and I did think it was good. I thought this was a good match. Him and Mendoza worked well together. Mendoza was able to do a lot of high-flying stuff. And Grimes ends up putting him away with the double stomp eventually. It was fine. I just didn't feel like I gained anything from seeing it. That's all I have to say. So now we get to what is going to be the main event of the network version, which is Kushida and 2 question marks versus Imperium, minus Walter, the 3 other guys, Alexander Wolf, Fabian Eicher, and Marcel Bartel. The 2 question marks are going to end up being Breezango, the Fashion Police. That was cool to see, I guess. Breeze, and this again, it turned into a regular main roster tag match. Breeze gets worked over for a long portion of this match. The hot tag, instead of going to Kushida, goes to Fandango. And Fandango takes out everyone, runs wild. He gets the tag into Kushida whilst taking out everyone with a dive over the top rope. Things break down. There's fighting on the outside. Kushida knocks 2 guys off the apron and then ends up rolling the one that he's in the ring with up with an Okada roll. And he gets the win. So, just to run through everything that happened before I talk about why I didn't like this. Kushida leaves the ring as all three guys try to attack him. Walter comes in with the surprise shot on Kushida. I think he just hit him once, and then all of Imperium stood tall to end the show. And I think that was it. I think he just hit him once, and that was it. But I feel like the whole point of this match should have been to make me invested in seeing Kushida versus Walter, or at the very least, making me believe that Kushida could possibly beat Walter. And they didn't do shit for Kushida in this match. Tyler Breeze got worked over forever, and he got the hot tag to Fandango. This was more of a showcase for them than it was for Kushida. Kushida did a few moves. He did like a handspring and did a drop kick, sending both guys off the apron, and then did a roll-up. Why am I supposed to believe that he can go toe-to-toe with Walter when this is the only match I've seen from Kushida? I don't get it. It didn't accomplish what I think it should have, and I don't know. Like I was interested in Kushida, and I still am, and I'm still gonna look forward to the match with him and Walter. But I feel like this was a missed opportunity to really show off what Kushida can do. And I don't really feel like they did anywhere near a sufficient amount of that. So I don't really feel like they capitalized on what they could have with this main event. And, you know, if they would have done it differently, if Kushida would have gotten the hot tag and they would have been able to show off what he can do a little bit more, and then you can end it the same way with Walter coming out and laying him out. But it took a roll-up to be able to beat one of Walter's cronies. So I'm not exactly convinced or even have a reason to doubt that Walter would just beat Kushida. So that's just how I feel about that. I just didn't really care for how they put together this six-man. But, yeah, that's my thoughts on NXT. I mean, I know it probably sounds like I'm down on this show, but I still had fun watching it. It's still very fresh and different to me, but I'm also going to point out what I don't care for. And I didn't really care for a good portion of the stuff on the show. Not because it was bad, but just because I feel like there's a lack of investment there. And, I mean, you know, if we do that with every show, if I do that with Raw and SmackDown, it'll be impossible to get through a review. Because I'll be saying that about, like, every single segment. But with this being such a new thing, I do want to try to be... I want to be fair to it, but I also want to look at it critically and nitpick if I have to, because this was a fine show and I had fun watching it, and there was nothing damaging like there would be on some of the main WWE shows where a character gets ruined or this and that, and they killed so-and-so's push, and now all that. There was none of that, like, and I'm sure there won't be much stuff like that on NXT. I just still feel like there's a lack of investment right out of the gate, and, you know, we'll see if that comes with time, but I do feel like they can do more to try to hook in viewers and make them take notice and pay attention. And there were a few things on this show that did that. There were a lot of things on the last show I felt like did that. And I just felt like this wasn't as good as last week. But, you know, that's just my thoughts on it. It's still a fine show. We'll be back here for NXT next week. We'll have the AEW review next Wednesday, as well as Raw and SmackDown. SmackDown will be on Friday. Tomorrow I'll have some work done on the channel. We're going to do the AEW Power Rankings. I'm going to do my predictions for the first show on TNT. That will be up sometime tomorrow or Friday. And we will also be predicting the tag team tournament. So all of that will be on the channel, so make sure you are subscribed to get all of the latest. But until next time, thank you all for watching. Later.